Things would be different if we had wings, even the crows, let alone the Gerfalcon's airfoil. Or if we could shake out over our heads an arras of cascading stars like the peacocks. We can't. It's words that deliver us. Man, woman, or child, we play Pygmalions to ourselves, sculpting in units of vibrating air, something we pray passes for human.
Everything that I personally love, is fading away from the world. So having the conviction that nostalgia is the most futile of human emotions, I just don't think about that.
The whole system is breaking down. Money has moved on out of rails into madness.
Things were different in those good old days, but if you ever really found yourself transported back into those good old days, you'd find yourself and everybody around you fervently anxious to get rid of those good old days and go into the future that beckoned them.
No, I should have asked forgiveness, because I could not save the last eagle, and already the golden bowl is broken, and the pitcher is broken at the cistern.
During a hawk watch, my father spoke about the subversion of the U.S. Constitution under George W. Bush.
The battle's been over since a guy was fraudulently elected president, and then probably fraudulently re-elected president. And every day of his two regimes has been devoted to the mendacious demolition, piece by piece, of the Constitution, of the supreme law of the land. There are certain things I regard as frivolous, and that would be any footage of me, fiddling or banjo picking and playing soccer with a bunch of little kids in the rain.
But to watch you, playing the fiddle, that captures people. Like you're a very vulnerable human being, and people want to see that. They don't just want to hear your poems.
What the hell is happening, to the very forehead of the world? It's just becoming furrowed and skimmed off, and nobody wants to say anything. Who are these people that call themselves poets, but when it comes to a thing like this, they're paralyzed, they're dumb, they're mute. I seem to be the only guy that ever wants to say anything about it. So I just feel like I've got to let out really one serious yawp here and not try to jolly anybody up with fiddle tunes and swing your partners. That's great, but it's the only thing that keeps me sane, besides the opportunity or the ability to speak out, to vent.
Those old bone-jarring trucks and couplings shrieking toward desperate city. I've tears now for trains the fathers have taken that set the sun's teeth on edge.
I am suspicious of this kind of shot.
I know.
What you're saying is, here's this old grizzled gentleman, walking along by himself, smoking his pipe, and bullshit. It is neither poetry nor politics. It's schmaltz.
Well, it's schmaltz if it's done poorly, but I mean, it reminds me of that Yeats line, you know. If a line doesn't seem but a moment's thought, all that working and reworking has been naught. But the fact is that to write a poem or to make a film is artificial. It's a work of art.
But in all those cases, the center of the thing is poetry. You know,
Yeah.
you can hear poetry going on.
Well, that's what we would do here. I mean, I don't think we would use this shot except with a voiceover of either you reflecting about something political or something poetic.
Well, that'd be all right. I think I'm doddering now, because I have trouble balancing, and I think I stagger sort of when I walk, you know. And I was trying to get a straight line down the road so I didn't look like I was a drunk coming up to ask for a drink.
Well, we found this old guy in the Bowery, and he was the perfect actor for the poet.
Ever since I was a little kid, every time a bird of prey passed over, my whole soul just arose.
I think he knows just about everything that's going on in the biosphere and beyond. And in contemplating some small part of our scenery, he can admirably meditate on the structure of life in general. He tends to look beyond the object to the universe.
Poetry is a little bit like mathematics. I think of it as a kind of mathematics which wouldn't even exist if it weren't imbued with subjective truth as well as computable truth.
It seems to me that in poetry we try to talk about everything that is out there and with our whole selves. And political poetry tends to become the utterance of one annoyed portion of the self.
Surely it can't be that we too, already back then, we the people, were lying? That what we meant all along was to sell off the country, acre by acre, law by law, office by office, until the presidency itself and enough arms for Armageddon goes by colossal fraud to a corporate-sponsored mannequin swaggering in our name, a threat to humanity and the planet?
I guess the earliest memories were when I was something less than 8. And he had a lot of little friends in the neighborhood. And I can remember being kind of an awed observer of him and his friends playing all kinds of battles.
You know, a kid assumed that at some point he was going to be a cowboy or a soldier or an aviator or a fireman or something that, you know, was kind of dramatic and heroic, because those were our heroes. You could see them right there on the screen, you know, every Saturday for a quarter. There was Buck Jones and Tom Mix, and, you know, and shooting over their shoulder and picking off the posse one by one, you know. Wow, God. As a kid, I drew pictures all the time. I planned and hoped to be an artist, a graphic artist. When I was about 15, I wrote a poem, much to my own surprise. And it was sort of a fascinating exercise. It called upon mental faculties or associative agilities that I didn't even know I possessed. And it seemed appropriate to write a poem about something. So I wrote a poem about this. It was about a bird going over something that I saw. Well, my mother liked it. That's a good beginning. And I thought the process was interesting and unusual and sort of mysterious to me and therefore attractive. Pretty soon I was grinding them out. And there used to be a high school weekly magazine in those days called Scholastic Magazine. And I sent poems to them, and they took every poem. But anyway, that was a sort of a taste of fame, you know, and that tasted good too. I continued writing verse right through the war, which came directly after my senior year in high school. It was my first year in college. December of that year, it was Pearl Harbor. The end of December, everybody in my college had, it seemed like every last one of us had signed up for the Air Force. The mindset at the time was that the worst thing that ever happened in the world was that Hitler took over Germany, and the Germans supported him, and they took over Europe, and now they're taking over half of Russia, and they're going to take over the whole world. You've got to stop them. Roosevelt kind of helped us get into it, but he saw that we had to get into it. We were in it, whether we liked it or not. We had to fight them in their terms. They're going to bomb cities in order to kill people, in order to destroy the infrastructure, social and industrial, of every country that they encounter. That's the way we got to beat them. You know, they figured it out. If you want to really win, kill everybody. We never saw the enemy up close, you know, just up from 27,000 feet. We just jumped down there, but the enemy saw us all right, and they kept shooting flak at us, and that was very, very accurate stuff sometimes, especially, you know, over Vienna. We took made a lot of holes in us. I didn't have a hard time at all compared to what some people had. Needless to say, compared to what my cousin got, which was to go on that infamous raid to Ploesti. We sent in group after group, and one group would be above or below the group ahead, not directly, of course, but often they would fly through the bursts of the group ahead of them, and so the next whole group would go down. But anyway, he was one of them. He was an armorer, so ground crew. His eyes weren't very good, and after fixing up the twin 50s and a nose of a B-24, he decided to accompany them himself, and he volunteered. That was the raid he volunteered for, but of course he was never seen or heard from again. The war made me think, every 20 years, something like this happens. We start killing each other on a grand scale. We start flattening whole cities. What's the reason for this? I mean, it happens so regularly that there must be a system that we're not quite aware of until it grabs us and it's too late. But if we could just be aware of it, maybe we could head it off. And so I became very sort of peace-oriented, or what would later be called that. But at that time, of course, I was dropping bombs myself, so I couldn't be too oriented and dodging flak. The European war was over, and all of us guys in the Air Force, most of us were sent to Florida and be redeployed to the Far East, to the Japanese War. Well, all of us that had, you know, put in maybe 20 or 30 missions or more in Europe figured, well, we got through that one. We're never going to get through another one. Come on, the odds are getting like this now. And Japanese, I mean, over Tokyo and places like that, I mean, the flak is going to be so thick you can walk on it, and we're not going to get back. And all of a sudden, bang. The war was over. There wasn't going to be any mass shipments to Tokyo area. We were saved. I mean, like, our lives have been handed back to us, you know. My God, I mean, the euphoria, the sense of incalculable relief, you know, from that. I'll never forget it. And no matter how many peaceniks since have just vented their opprobrium on the American government for what it did there, I'll never forget just dancing in the streets for joy and relief. But that's the mindset of the time. A bunch of Japanese got killed. I almost said a bad word. Okay, too bad. All of the wars ultimately are about the fact that there are too many people, too many goats for the amount of grass we got, too many sheep for the meadow. And so the ultimate resource is arable land. And the ultimate or optimal use of that is to produce food for the great numbers of people there are. And so I decided to be a farmer. So I went back to college here, and there weren't any courses in agriculture at Harvard. They had one. It was called the Economics of Agriculture. So I took that. I didn't have the brains to think, well, why the hell don't I go somewhere else where I could learn to be a farmer? But I was just having too good a time there, and all the other stuff was fascinating to me too, you know. There were name writers and poets, you know, on the campus in the great library, and they had a poetry conclave once a month. That was exciting, you know, because we'd sit there and every session somebody would bring in all his poems in mimeograph form, pass them around. And then he'd read them. And then everybody would have at him. Some pro, some con. And so the discussion was, could be devastating, but it was always very lively. And I was always a vociferous participant in that. You know, I must have been a much detested character, because they all fell short of my standards. Well, my standards were, I didn't realize it, but were those of Robert Frost. I was putting them all up against Robert Frost and finding them all wanting. But I never mentioned his name, because I didn't know that's what I was doing. But so I finally woke up. They finally woke me up. Leslie Fiedler woke me up, and in a very nice way too. He didn't say you jerk. He said, that's very nice. These poems of yours are very nice. He said, because they're all very derivative of Robert Frost. What? I said, what? It was like, you know, being hit over the head with a sledge. But he was right. Well, your mom was, I met her at Radcliffe after the war. I came back to college on the GI Bill. She had quite a number of suitors there, and some of them were big society people, and they knew things about her that I didn't know. She went for my act, whatever it was at the time, you know. I kind of swaggering around there, being one of the veterans, you know, just back off from the war and feeling important, and at least trying to make other people think I was important. She was intrigued by that, I guess, and she made it very clear that she enjoyed my company, and she was very lovely when she was in a jovial mood and sort of manic. I mean, she just lit up a room. But she had some money behind her, but that had never figured in it. We're turning our backs on all that. We were going to go live in the woods and have kids and under the shade of a tree and on the dappled lawn somewhere up in the country, you know. It all turned around. It was like 180 degrees. She regretted being married. She regretted being pregnant. And she felt like she was imprisoning herself, you know, just shackling herself to all these domestic chores that everybody else has to do, but she didn't have to do it. And she was faced with the facts, the same old facts everybody else has to face eventually. She became less and less close to me. I mean, I was just a sort of a millstone around her neck, really. And she wanted to be free. A lot of it was my fault, you know. My response to all that was to live a kind of an unconventional and sort of sexually predatory life, and that didn't help any. So finally, we just didn't match anymore. During the McCarthy time, I was known to be on the side of some workers who were on strike at the paper I worked on in New Rochelle, and I wrote up their case, you know, and was told that they wouldn't print it, and I was outraged at that. I outraged all my journalistic ethics. And so I left, but I left being branded a communist without realizing it. So I finally finagled a job way up here in Catskill where they never heard of me. And so I lived here. So much for my family under an apple tree.
By 1962, my father had met and married my stepmother, Ruth Kane Dufault.
We just I think we really always felt like really good friends. It was really wonderful to talk to Peter. He was so interested in everything and full of ideas, and for me that was very attractive. We've always shared a lot of concerns. We felt that we could rely on each other to be kind of a good strong wall to lean against.
I taught up at Skowhegan in Maine one summer of '65, and I really became conscious of some of my students going from Skowhegan into the Army. There was a draft then, and it hadn't sort of registered with me. Your father sort of got me galvanized, by once, whatever the date of that was, March of '66, I guess. He said, we ought to go to New York and march today and protest the war, and I hadn't. And he really awakened the sort of ire in me, been sort of lying dormant for a while.
I used to teach history in a little private school. The years were in the 60s, the years of Vietnam. And I had only one question. I said that what it boiled down to, I told the kids, I said, there's only one question now. What led America, beginning as it began, with the commitments that it took upon itself, end up as what it's doing now? Napalming people in straw huts, destroying whole forests so that they can't hide from you, poisoning the deltas, How did we get there? And I said, forget your textbook. I said, it's written by some damn corporation who's appealing to the least common denominator and the biggest common contributor. So forget the textbook. I'm the textbook. But that was the liveliest course in the whole school, because everybody in it was at stake. Their own lives were at stake on the question. 63 to 73. Unhappy country, what wings you have, what eyes of jellied fire, what claws for cratering farmlands in the straw slums of the East. Your enemies are burning and their harvests rot. Your friends are burning and their harvests rot. Your screams across the world's airwaves of peace, peace, mock their rubble graves. Unhappy eagle, crest that gleams among the stars, and chicken mind. When feathers of steel molt, and over the dead paddy, dead silence supervenes. Oh, weep for the world-darkening means, the ridiculous reasons, and the bloody and shabby pathos of the result.
Peter had a pretty profound influence on my life at a very young age. I was at the Barlow School, and he was our poet, history teacher, soccer coach. I think to be a poet is a political act, especially in this day and age.
I met Peter at Barlow. The whole Barlow experience for me as a young man was opening my eyes to everything. It was absolutely a gorgeous place to grow up in and be introduced to poetry and music. And there were no cell phones. It was all organic communication. We didn't watch TV, and you don't have all the paraphernalia that all kids have today. There is something eternal about people getting together in song and poetry. I specifically remember coming off a soccer field and they were taking a picture after a game, and it was you and Louis Panos, Laughing Louie, and I said, I'm always going to remember this, and I can feel the sun of this autumn day and see you guys, you were laughing and happy. And I looked back, and the intensity of that feeling in my youth about time passing was more profound then than as I've gotten older. I guess my question is, as we get older, does the muse get dimmer? Is most art a younger man's game because of the intensity and passion of our feelings, and as we get older
I suspect that is the case, but you can be well along in age and still be galvanized emotionally by almost anything, and especially questions that are political.
What do you think
all.
is the most, for you, moving political poem you've ever heard, or that's been
Most
that,
political,
that
moving
is,
political
that is,
poem.
that has touched you personally?
Probably the greatest political poem that I could think of begins 77 years ago. Our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now that's pretty abstract stuff. That is a poem, as a speech or a poem, call it what you will. There's more poetry than truth, you might say, in it. But there's a poem, and it's something that people have died for, you know. Thousands of people have died to hold the nation together.
It's always seemed a paradox to me that you've been an anti-war activist ever since World War II, and yet you've engaged in mock war and enjoyed that. You were a fencer at college and a Golden Gloves boxer, and in my youth you were the fearless leader in the toy soldier battles and BB gun wars that we waged out in the cow pasture.
I always thought of them as mock combats, you know. They were combats in which nobody got hurt, and anything like that was always fun to me. You know, fencing, yeah, great, you can pretend you're dead, you know, but nobody's hurt.
I remember in therapy one time, my shrink said to me, well, you know, having your father, you know, shoot at you could be very traumatic. You know?
Well, but, yeah. Well, the point was that they should sting but not hurt. I just can't see that footage as having any relationship first to poetry. None.
No.
Next to politics. Second to politics. None.
Well, I think it does. I differ with you in its relevance to politics. You and I, my brothers, we all grew up in probably the most militaristic country in the history of mankind. So I do think that it's very relevant that a bunch of boys and their fathers, you know, with a gun and you know, and a helmet and, you know, shooting live ammunition at my brothers. And
my relationship to war is real. I was in a goddamn war, and I damn near got killed in that, and my cousin was killed in that, and those are pertinent to your portrait of this guy. That's the pugnacity or the belligerence that ought to be in the film, but not this phony belligerence.
Move up to the line. Cease fire.
Of course, a mock war inevitably brings to mind the real one. If anything could bring to mind what's there already, gnawing on the conscience. I can only say for the mock one what I wish were true for the real one, that it doesn't do violence to the truth, or to humanity, or to the land itself.
In dreams, you know, one of my standard nightmares is, where's Ethan? Where's Ethan? Where'd I leave him? You know, and then I wake up and I realize you're a big grown-up man and got a practice of your own and you live 20 miles away and we're good friends and wow, what a relief. Most of my paternal grief, you know, sort of focused on you. I was always very close to, in an animal way, to my kids, more than most fathers are, because I felt like I had to sort of fill in, you know, for her. And I can remember lying on the couch and being sort of half asleep, and 2 or 3 of you right on the same couch as well, either tumbling around on top of me or sound asleep yourself. And it felt good, it felt right, you know, and I missed it. All of a sudden, for you, that just stopped. Oh, I hate to think of those days.
Yeah.
Just awful. And so unpoetic, so undramatic, just sheer bottom of the barrel, mainstream pain. You're on the train and gone now. Young man, you aren't riding in style, nor on any wave save the dead ebb of one Cornelius Vanderbilt strode glittering onto a remote reef of the century. Even so, it pulls us apart, 11 miles long and lengthening, our last hand grip across the grinding wheels. I hadn't finished. What was it I meant to tell you? I always assumed America, it had room in it for kind of some stewardship of the landscape and some reverence for other forms of life and some appreciation for the beauty of other creatures and places. And these were valuable things, but they're antithetical to the mindset of the current administration that has just this week issued another rule making it okay to blow off the tops of mountains more and more and more. More mountains. We've got to blow off the tops of more and more mountains to get more and more coal. Blowing off the tops of mountains, I mean, this seems like an insane degree of hubris, you know, of avarice and insensate violence. All I can think of is the Habakkuk, the Old Testament prophet, who said, I shall lift up mine eyes unto the hills from whence cometh my strength. And I always remember that line because it's so true. I always felt that way. You look up at the hills and it does something for you, you know. The simple seriousness of hills, dull humps and withers, brown with stubble or moss green, bent as if they could graze, or maybe were praying, old fidels, foreheads against the hidden stone, foreheads and knees. Their simple gravity is so great that they can pull a man down too, to his knees, if he looks suddenly at them, as if the will crumbled, confronted with such weight as hauls their long slopes downward through field after field and holds them still 1,000 years. Sometimes, passing them in a car, cornered, clock-ridden, you could almost weep for wanting to walk out or run the length of their dry cymes, dead leaves, blackbird empty, aphelion. Till spring or ice or inland sea come round again and lose this hour hand hewing at our lives. Oh, hills have time and time and time to try the dust's humility, to strengthen prophets and empower lovers by their long paradigm.
My father rehabilitated several hawks when I was growing up. One was a kestrel we named Ratso that my sister Tina found on his road. In 2007, we decided to go to Cape May during the hawk migration to look for peregrine falcons and their smaller cousin, the American kestrel.
Before you know it, you'll be falling down the road. And over at the crossroad, they stole a sign. So all you do is walk through a straight line. Listen, listen, my son, my son, I won't tell you twice what I can't tell you once.
A peregrine, Dad, peregrine, coming right in. Oh, look at this, look at this. Oh,
wow.
Rick, take a look at that. If you can get in.
Cool.
Nice.
Well, the reason I keep thinking Merlins lately is that that's what I'm seeing in the Berkshires. I've
Really?
seen 2 of them or 3 of them in the last year, and no that's not true. 1 kestrel.
Yeah.
And in the old days, we saw hundreds of kestrels.
Yeah, we did.
In a summer, and they're
Yeah.
gone.
Yeah, they were on every telephone wire. Kestrel, too, dwindling now. That small falcon, somehow quarried out of a rainbow with its saffron and ash blue blazons. And nary a one seen yet, and the summer half gone. Watching 2 of them once, tumbling among canyons and crags of summer cloud, I felt top lofty, proud to be in the same world with them. But I suppose even then, it had been moot how much longer they could live with us.
My sister died at the age of 49. The loss we felt was difficult to speak about. The only way I could broach the subject was to ask him to read his poem, Oneric.
In this dream, it was evident that by some matter-of-fact household miracle, commensurate with hearing one's lost daughter singing on an old 60s tape, or closer yet, encountering her in a full color and sound video, commensurate but by some or otherworldly multiple, more real. She was among us, not as in life, but in life, and all of us giddy at being reminded that, of course, death isn't final.
The language of poetry provided a bridge, making a presence out of absence.
I used to take the fiddle and just play tunes and sit on her bed and rub her feet and whatever anybody else was doing, And I still thought she, was not dying. She was, just down, but would get up. The story I most remember about her, about the bird that was making a noise in the cellar there. They couldn't figure out what it was. There were folks around there, and they wouldn't hear anything. And then all of a sudden they'd hear it again. And it seemed to be coming out of the furnace. But they went over to the furnace, and they opened the door. And there, sitting on the sill behind the door, was a beautiful little male kestrel with all its plumage, just sitting there, blinking at him. And it sat there for a minute, and then zoomed right through them, and out the door they'd come in. People will come back and occupy certain pockets of a life that never properly filled up. Well, say that she did come. She, or whatever of her, or any self, persists after the body's gone. Either that, or name the cold numerals of cause and effect, by which a mere chaos, a dream, can lobotomize out of a man his common sense, his common witness, his common logic, and yet leave enough of who he is to locate, to identify as his own, an impossible happiness?
I'm happy as sawing wood, I guess, balanced there over the cut, as much pull as push as the blood goes from the heart then toward it, or the breath goes, or a fiddle bow. We're at home somehow, where a balance is. Push and pull, half a yard only, my own alternation goes. No talents required, only standing in one place. How much more should one ask, though, when whatever's gone is gone, and what is to come or not come, nothing can reach, and what we have only on balance. Why become militantly opposed to some course of action by a government? Well, because you're committed culturally to certain standards, and particularly in the case of your government, if it's a popular government and you're in it, and it behaves, in a rogue fashion, incompatible to anything that you regard as decent or honest or honorable, well, then you've got to take a stand. And if you're going to ignore it, well, that's your stand. America the beautiful, okay for what scenery's left. Plus, if you write off, and for Christ's sake or humanity's sake, say it. Just once, somebody, anybody, say it. The moral landscape, the looted treasury, the gold medals given for lying, torturers and kidnappers dispensing justice, the stolen elections, the sawdust duce doubling as geopolitical black hole and a laughing stock, booted, sombreroed cowboy Caligula who couldn't manage a straw horse on a parade float, and never dead-aimed at anything but the high law he's sworn to, a goddamn scrap of paper, and never led anything but cheers screened for in advance by thought police, and never said anything coherent, not crafted by casuists and pettifoggers to camouflage its insidious opposite. While the purple mountain's majesty, wasn't that it, collapses into cloth flats, knee-high behind an imperial swagger and a vice-regal sneer. Oh, it may be that this is beautiful to somebody, to them anyway, the capitalists of disaster, drag racing their panic-propelled quadrillion-dollar waste-making, bloody bulldozer of a junta to pile Pelion on Assa, and Iraq on Afghanistan, and itself on Iraq, and the whole suffocating colossus of pestilent rubble onto the thin shoulders of yet-to-be-born bankrupts who won't be singing anything anymore in America the whatever. Well, I was just thinking of the place of the Constitution in our society and in history. It's not just a piece of paper. It's like a living thing. I see things in the Constitution that reflect the notion that the competition is inevitable. People are beastly And they'll take everything they can get. The chief implement has been this very, very slow accretion of power to corporations. And there's always been corporations for a long time, even under the king, when there were still colonies. But they had very strict charters. And if they violated their charters, they were called to account fast. But in the colonies, when they became independent, then the charters to corporations were given by the legislatures of each. Slowly they began to maneuver for making the laws more convenient to them. Somewhere in the late 1800s, that made a law. It conferred personhood on a corporation. The corporation has all the rights of a person. But what they left out was that they're really not persons, that they don't have what most persons have, which is a conscience. But a corporation has only one purpose, money. And under our capitalistic system, that's the last thing that's ever going to be challenged or remedied. And yet it's the first thing that we should attack. It's the first. We should clip the wings of these corporations, pinion them, until they were really just persons and had to suffer for what they did. Obama's accession to power is in itself a sort of miracle. The only way to sustain that miraculous quality is for him to do what those people who put him in power expected him to do, was to return this country to its ethical, humanitarian, and constitutional obligations as to how it conducted itself in the world. I see Obama as sort of riding on a nightmare, blissfully ignorant of the fact that he's sitting on it backwards to begin with, and has no control over it, and it makes no sense. He's surrounded himself with the kind of people who were most benefited and most conspicuous in the Bush-Cheney administration, namely the industrial, financial, and pharmaceutical tycoons. Instead of sweeping him out of the stable like Jesus in the temple, they've just simply given him his own bowl. Here, sit down, join us. The gap between his rhetoric and his performance, I find deeply depressing. Can the law hold when those sworn to uphold it can plausibly deny having had time to read it? Can the law hold when every blood, culture, and tongue from all 7 continents clamors at it for parity? Can the law hold when comity among men, even all men, is no longer enough, and the world groans at us, seas a sewer, the raindrops a curse, gentlemen of the city of brotherly love? Can the law hold and not hold only, but broaden, a check and a balance between such brothers as we are, and this nightmare trashing of the earth? Time after time after time, I'm glad I don't have to teach American history anymore, because I don't know what to say. I don't know what this country has come to. I know what it's come to. I don't know if it's reparable. I don't know if we can do anything about it. And if we can't, you're on your own, kid. You're on your own. Do your best. I mean, as the poet Matthew Arnold once wrote, under similar circumstances, he says, "Ah, love, let us be true. Let us be true to one another, for the world, which seems to lie before us like a land of dreams, hath really neither joy nor love nor light, nor certitude nor peace, nor help from pain. And we are here as on a darkling plain, swept by confused alarms of struggle and flight. where ignorant armies clash by night. So I hope for the best, but I don't promise anything.
I wonder if you ever think about your death.
It reminds me of being 20 years old and in a war and surrounded by guys, all of whom, including myself, aren't sure they're going to get through the next week. I mean, that's a funny thought I've had, not so funny either, ever since 1945. We're all contemporaries. We could all just go this week. All of us, everyone, man, woman, and child, young, old, and in between. Yeah, it's, the world, in other words, has become, the world we know, has become a very mortal entity. Item 12, in-ray realistic assessments. That I've aged into a face, pig-lidded, chop-fallen, a scare mask and memento mori. That the U.S. isn't looking good either. Hypocrite, paranoid, bully, assassin of the so-called free world. Caught murdering and lying one week and crying credibility the next. Because the U.S. must grow, understand? Having borrowed the sun and the moon, while in fact, like myself, it is shrinking near the last of its capital. One continental landmass plus the odd archipelago taken by force or by fraud. Is that it? No. I must note also that a great arc of the sky, dark blue and brushed with wing-form apricot-colored clouds, at this very instant in the west, almost makes everything okay. Well, not coming to the end, maybe, of ego and old glory, but having been here at all.
Like a giant wave from a killer storm, like a big tornado hits your trailer home, like a foolish words before a despot's throne, like a loaded 38 when you're home alone. I can't wait much longer. Got to make my love a little stronger. Like the patron saint for the lost at sea, like one last look that can set you free, like stepping stones to eternity. I got one last prayer on a bed. Like a civil war in your hometown, like a place of worship turned a killing ground, like the dust of the bones my best friend, like the notes of a song that will never end.